to dwell in the sanctuary, O Lord, which thy hands have established. Now I'll tell you up front that Israelites weren't world travelers. The world traveled through their country, but they, unless they were dispersed by God or under some hand of judgment, they weren't like traveling all over the world. God gave them a country that was self-sustained. It flowed with milk and honey. There was ore and precious metals there. There was precious water sources there. Everything they needed was in that land. And God isolated from the world to teach people a lesson. That if you want to be close with God, you've got to narrow down where you live. You've got to narrow down where you travel. I'm not just speaking of just physical travel, understand. But you've got to get where God is. Not ask God to get where you are. And there's a vast difference between the two. So he viewed it as an entire land, thy sanctuary. Then from another viewpoint, he called his people, Israel, Judah in particular, he called them his sanctuary. The people themselves, in the aggregate, were his sanctuary. Psalm 114:2. Judah was his sanctuary, and Israel his dominion. Well, technically the whole world is dominated by God, but if you really wanted to know something about God, you had to get where some Jew was. You had to be in contact with his people. You couldn't get God's message out of the sky. Even if you're a wise man from the east and you found a star that belonged to a coming king and you knew about it, eventually you had to ask somebody that was in God's people where that place where he was born was. Eventually it got down to you had to ask somebody that knew God. I'm reminded in the Song of Solomon when the woman's lover came to see her and he put his hand through a hole in the door. I agree with it. It was a hole where they could have a rope and open the handle of the door and so forth. He wanted her to come to the door. And she said, I'm sleeping right now. And he kept wanting her to come. So she decided, I'm going to get myself ready. So she got up and perfumed herself and got ready. She come to the door and there wasn't anybody there. He'd gone. And so she went out looking for her lover, which he called a shepherd. And she found some of the specialists that knew about where the shepherd was. So where's the shepherd at? And here's what the shepherds told her. They said, well, you got to go where the sheep are feeding. Wherever the sheep are feeding, that's where the shepherd is. That sanctuary has to do with that. If you want to know about God, you just don't go to someone who's specialized in researching the Bible. You've got to go to someone who's walking with the King and who knows the Lord. You've all lived long enough to kind of pick up on distinguishing the difference between the two. All of us have been able to talk to people that didn't know which way was up when it came to the things of God, but yet they were professionals in the religious environment. But when you really wanted to know God's mind on a matter, you knew you had to go to somebody that was where God was. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about the sanctuary. And here's an interesting concept. Through Ezekiel, God had said that he himself was the sanctuary. How's that for narrowing it down? This is Ezekiel 11:16. Therefore say, say this, thus saith the Lord God, although I have cast them far off among the heathen, and although I have scattered them among the countries, yet will I be to them a little sanctuary in the countries where they have come. I will be a little. What did he mean when he said a little sanctuary? Did he mean he's going to be very, very small? No, he's going to say, as far as you're concerned, that's all you need is a little sanctuary because you're little. Here you are, little among the nations. You're dispersed. God said, you can find your refuge in me. I'll be a little sanctuary in the countries where he dispersed them because of their sin. See, so you can, to any backslider, to any person that's drifted from God, you can say right where you're at, start seeking God. And God will be a little sanctuary. You'll be able to find him. Another use of the word sanctuary, remember this is a place now where God is. And we've seen it was a whole land, he was there. It was an entire people, he was there. God himself was a sanctuary for the person who was isolated from the homeland and from the Jews. See, God himself was a sanctuary. Here's another reference in Ezekiel 45:4. And this particular text, the priests would be given a section of land called the sanctuary. The holy portion of the land shall be for the priests, the ministers of the sanctuary, which shall come near to minister unto the Lord, and it shall be this special part of the land. It shall be a place for their houses and a holy place for the sanctuary. So where they pitch their house, it'll be a sanctuary. I'll talk with them there. I'll meet with them there. With the priests that wait on my sanctuary, serve my sanctuary. Not only will they serve me when they come into my sanctuary, where they put their houses, that be my sanctuary. I'll stay there. See, so God identifies with his people, you see. The tabernacle itself, was one of the texts we read today, was called a sanctuary. It's a small structure, 45 feet by 15 feet. 45 feet long, 15 feet wide. In all the world, think how big the world is. Just think how big the world is, and here's a 45 feet long temporary structure by 15 feet wide, and that's where God dwelt in all the world. There was a time when you wanted to know God, you had to get to that tabernacle. You wanted some kind of intercession. See, God can narrow down access to himself. There's a sense in which I understand that wherever there's a humble and contrite heart in the whole world, God will, but that soul's going to have to get where the information and direction and blessing is. They're going to have to make their way out of wherever they're at to this place where God dwells. And some of us that live long enough, we've actually experienced this. We know exactly what this is talking about. And there, it's interesting, there was a special money that was consecrated and associated with the sanctuary. This money was called the shekel of the sanctuary. It's mentioned 25 times in the scriptures. And if you wanted to use purchase money to buy, sacrifice, or do some kind of barter that had to do with religious service, free a slave or something of this sort, you had to use money. The shekel of the sanctuary is a special kind of money that you had to use. One of the verses speaking about it is Exodus 30 and verse 13. They shall give everyone that passeth among them that are numbered half a shekel after the shekel of the sanctuary. Now, they gave this to support the priests. That was one of the things they used it for. But it had to be, you just couldn't give dirty money to the priest. You couldn't like go out and sell a dog, bring the proceeds in and say, here, I'm going to give this as a gift to the church. Or he also mentioned the price of a whore. A harlot couldn't take the proceeds of her trade and bring the tithe into the Lord's house. It had to be a shekel of the sanctuary. It had to be clean, dedicated money. I'm showing you here God is particular about what goes on in his name, where he is. And even in the tabernacle,